Well, I'm going to try to get to this. And what is the point, you say? The point is a quarter century of bicycle technology. BMX freestyle technology. This is as close of a comparison as I can get. However, I will say that my performer is not a team model. It's not the Pro Freestyle Tour. So it's not quite as good as comparably speaking, as the BK Team Signature. And what the biggest difference would have been is this bike, it's more set up like an old school bike. However, the quill style stem would have been a 1 1/8 like that, and it would have been very likely a GT piston stem, as well as the Pro Freestyle Tour would have come with a 3-piece GT bottom, 3-piece chromoly crank. That's a 1-piece crank. However, the sprocket came off a 3-piece crank. And this, even though it's a lower end one, because you could say it's a pinch pull style. I said this before, the only ones that came with the 4130 stamp came on the team signature bikes. So it's, even though it's a pinch pull style, and I know people will complain, but I'm not that good of a rider, so I don't need much better of a crank. I just don't. But either way, they're both pretty comparable. I will say, of course, the green bike weighs way more, and that's because people got smarter. I mean, they have some funky looking freestyle bikes, but you look at freestyle bikes nowadays and they more or less look like racing frames did back in the day. They call that a double diamond style frame. Just a simple straight stick frame. And that, of course, is a much more costly process. That's a platform style bike, and it has a lot more bended tubes and whatnot, which was indicative of freestyle in the 80s and 90s. The frames were really gnarly looking, and the color schemes were really cool. And by the way, I could only restore that paint. You can't get that paint, so it's been restored a little bit, even though it's slightly dusty. But yeah, that is a beautiful paint scheme. Uncommon, as is my metal flake. It's a beautiful paint scheme. It's uncommon. Like my General Lee with the gray paint. It's uncommon. I have a thing for uncommon paint. Okay, my dyno is white and my wife's bike is black, but that's one of 2 bikes. Either way. The bike on the bottom is much lighter. It is much lighter. And something you're gonna notice is the back of your hands when you do stupid freestyle stuff and you run a flangeless grip. Once in a while your hands hit that when you do stuff. And what I will say with the Tech 77s, with that hinge in the back, because it's not like the 2-piece back that slips in. It's an actual hinge, and that hits your hand and kind of fucking sucks. As well as the difference in gyros. The old style gyro, they just weren't good, man. I didn't even want to run a gyro on this bike because I know they fuck the brakes right up. They make them work like garbage. On top of the fact that I have plastic wheels, which is another reason they're not that desirable. Alloy wheels just grip so much better. And of course, that's why I went with the polished braking surface. Rhino lights. That's one thing. Those rims, you could have got those when this was brand new. You could have got yourself a set of Rhino lights, which tended to be the second choice. Most guys wanted an Alex triple wall, but the Sun Rhino light was the second choice. If a guy wanted a slightly lighter but really strong rim, this is the rim you went with. So you could have gotten those rims with that bike. However, I have a cassette hub, the Clutch V2, and the Vandera Pro in the front. And that's very, very techy. I'm still not quite used to it. And this is, of course, because it's those plastic wheels. It's a thread-on freewheel. I've got an ACS claws on it. And yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to be it. I wanted for it to be appropriate for what it was. One thing you'll notice most about riding these bikes, the one thing you're gonna notice the most, well, I have those Kenda contact tires, and you would have had something like that came with the bike. However, if I ran an alloy rim, I could run them at a higher pressure, but I don't like going over 60 PSI on these because they will pop off the bead, or they'll just the plastic wheels will handle funny. When you brake, you'll notice it'll be kind of blocky, like what's going on with it. It's just not ideal. It's not a metal rim. So, and you know, if you were to give me the black bike when I was 16 years old, I would have loved this bike so damn much because the geometry, I didn't know anything about geometry. You know, you went out before, you got a bike that was, you know, your size, so you get a Performer or a Dyno or an SM or whatever the fuck you want to got back in the mid-school. And top tubes really only mattered on things like racing bikes or trail and jumping frames. So you get something like a 19, a 20, or a 21. They didn't really go in increments like this one on the bottom is a 20 and 3/4. You just didn't have stuff like that. It would be 20 or 21 or 19. That's what you would get. But one thing I would not have put on my bike back in the day is the pads. But I am old and I have crashed on this bike before and I need the pads. I'd really like to have one on the stem, but I'm just too much of a fucking narcissist. I think it's too pretty. So I like showing off that beautiful stem on there. I think it's a great part. Especially now that GT's out of business and those ones are a lot harder to find now. Especially in great shape like that. But anyways, I don't even know if this video went anywhere, if I even made a point, but I would say 25 years of bike technology is so different. I would say they would be as different as the seats and seat posts. What do you mean? Well, in the day, almost all bikes had a 22.2 seat post or a 7.8, you know, and they had a railed with metal seat guts up underneath it. They all did. And you know, the separate, and you can still get bikes with a separate seat post. This one does have an integral seat post, which I don't have a problem with because it hasn't broke. And I find it more of a pain in the ass because this is as far forward as I can tilt my seat on a pivotal with a layback. And that's a little bit of an advantage. I can get that a little flatter, but I just get used to riding my bike that way for the newer one. I do have repop bars on the new bike, and I would have said, if it would have been more accurate, that those would have been a much lower, they would have been 8 inches reach at the very most. You're talking like a 7.5, 8 inch bar is what I would have rocked back in the day. And these are 9.125. Just those handlebars alone actually make the whole bike feel a lot bigger with the layback. I can pedal it around. It actually feels like a 24-inch bike with a little bit lower to the ground. It's not terrible. And that bike, even though it's got much, much better geometry and much better technology, it's smoother in every single way. It still feels like a small bike. It does. The only difference would be if I sat down and pedaled it, oddly enough, because it's got a much longer top tube. The bike on the bottom is easier to sit and pedal, but standing and pedaling, the old bike is better. And you know what we did not have back in the day? We did not have plastic peg sleeves, and we did not have hub guards. When you ground on your bike, you hopped up on something, you were either really good and careful or you broke spokes all the time. Bent spokes all the time. Scratched the shit out of those spokes. And when I bought this bike, I had it for about a week and a half, and then I put pegs on it and I went to do a big frickin' grind on it with the tires that came on it. And one thing happened, I bent the front axle, the 3/8 axle, because it wasn't a heat-treated chromoly axle. I bent it immediately. As well as I scratched the shit out of the spokes and almost broke one of them on the first grind. Then I realized I had to go get hub guards. Yeah. Just didn't have that back in the day. I'd even say you see, those are brand new Odyssey F32s. And look at that, the dropout is actually quite a bit thinner than the old GT chromoly, but I mean, everything was kind of overbuilt on the older bikes, right? The mid-school bikes were famous for being fucking heavy-ass pigs and being overbuilt. And where a lot of people would have some very mixed things to say about newish GT bikes, this was one of the good ones. It was a much more simple design and it was much better thought out. It was designed and built for Brian Kaczynski. were originally the GT Performers a long time ago in the 80s. They were built for Eddie Fiola and a couple guys that put in, you know, some creative, Martin Aparijo and a couple guys that put in creative ideas, and that's why they had the original bent down tube and stuff, and the platform was all for riding. But that first bike was designed for them, and GT kept making the same bike and making little tweaks to it and stuff, but it was no longer the custom team kind of, the real rider designed bike. And that's how GT just sort of faded and lost its glory in time. They became less sought after. Companies like S&M definitely took their spotlight, and guys like me switched to that brand because of it. They just made better stuff. Even though this is a Chinese made bike, I will say the little touches, I think it's a really damn good frame for a Chinese frame. You know, it's chromoly, but I think it's a really damn good frame. It was well built. I have no complaints with this at all. It feels super damn solid. And it's been 11:10 of me yapping. I don't think I'm done, but yeah. If you're old enough to remember, and I mean, a lot of guys like the 80s bikes, right? And that's why I like the mid-school, because I remember in my teens and pre-teens, mid-school bikes were the shit. And this green Performer, I would have loved to have had a bike like this. But I grew up pretty poor, and my bikes off the track were just cobbled together pieces of shit that had, you know, stolen parts that were given to me from friends or hand-me-down crap. I never would have been able to build a bike like this to my taste as a kid, so I will say my bike never would have looked this nice at all. And now that my body's failing too much to actually ride like I once could, now I can afford the bikes I want. And say what you will, but those bikes are built the way I wanted to. I wanted to build them like that way. The green bastard never gets ridden. It's okay once in a while. It's a good novelty, but I just like riding the newer bikes, and I like being able to rely on my bike and beat the shit out of it, not worry about breaking something that's collectible, right? Anyways, from the home of Health Track right here in gorgeous Northwest Calgary, Alberta. That's been me, John, for a little while. I'll shut the fuck up and get out of your hair. I hope everybody has a fantastic Friday. And I'm gonna go for a bit of a prowl, but I'll leave you to it, fellas. Y'all stay rad now.